start a session on Angular 4. I have an overall experience of 4.5 years, and in Accion Labs, I have just completed 1 year. So in Accion Labs, I have worked on Angular 1.5 for say around 7 months or so, and then I have also worked on Angular 4 for 4 to 5 months. And now currently I have been working on React, Redux, and Flux. So currently I'm not working on Angular, but still. So I'm going to start it, but before that, let me tell you, this is the first time I'm taking a session. So any suggestions, appreciations are highly welcome.
It's not comfortable to sleep.
Few people will say,
Including you. Okay, so let me start. But before that, do you guys have any question from the previous 2 sessions? Any? No? Okay, let's start. Okay, so this is what we are going to cover today. Directives, pipes, observables, services, forms, component interaction, and routing. I know this is too much for one day, but I'll try to cover as much as possible. Thank you. Thank you for the correction. Okay, let me start with directives. So directives serves 2 purposes. First one is it adds behavior to a UI DOM element, or it extends the HTML vocabulary of a browser. What do I mean by each one of these? I'll just go over them. But before that, let me classify directives. So directives can be of 3 types: attribute directives, structural directives, and components. Components are the ones that have been already highlighted earlier. So I'm not going much deep into that. I'll go into attribute directives and structural directives. So attribute directives. These directives, they don't interfere with the existence of its host element. Now, what do I mean by a host element? Let me come here. Okay, so you see these ng class or ng style that I would have used somewhere else too. These won't affect the structure of this DOM element. The DOM element in concern here is button, and this will be the host of this directive. So the directive here is ng class, and the button is the host. Now, when I'm talking about attribute directives, and when I say that they don't interfere with the existence of the host element, it just means that the host element remains as it is. They just add a few behavior to it. What do I mean by that? By adding behavior, I simply mean that you see I have this button here, peace and chaos. This is a toggle button functionality that I have implemented here just for demo purposes. So now, when I click on, say, chaos, you see the highlight changes. The overall button remains the same, but it's just an extra attribute of btn primary that I am adding here. You see, choice of life, if it is peace, then for the button peace, I am adding a class of btn primary. Understandable? Okay. Sorry? Okay. So whenever choice of life is peace, I am adding a class of btn primary, but when it is not, then I'm adding a class of btn default. Btn default will simply mean this white one. So when I select peace, you see peace here. And when I select chaos, you see chaos here. So just that, it adds some more behavior to the button. That's it, a dynamic behavior. Let me come to ng style. Now ng style here, this one, when I select chaos, it is represented here in red, but when I select peace, it is represented in green. Now how do I change that? I change that simply by using ng style. Now where are you? Okay, you choose this. ng style, choice styles. Let me go to the component part. Yeah, you see here too I have this almost the same condition. When choice of life is peace, then this I am setting the style to green, whereas for the other case I am setting the style to red. I hope that that's understandable. When I come here, okay, let me refresh this. So by default, the value of variable choice of life is peace. That's why peace is highlighted here, and that's why the color is green here. But when I click on this choice chaos here, then this one changes and this one changes too, because the value of choice of life changes based on the click. I'll show that here. Set choice. You see, when I click on the button peace, I set the choice to peace. But when I click on button chaos, I set the choice to chaos.
So where are we setting it as default?
Okay, good question. So when I declare this variable choice of life, there itself I am initializing it. Okay, this can also be done in the ng on init section here, but it's okay. That's not a big deal. Any questions? Okay, so this is about attribute directives. It just adds attributes, doesn't change the structure. Now if I come to the structural directives, okay. So these are few examples of structural directives: ngIf, ngSwitch, ngPlural, ngFor. ngIf will display or remove a DOM element based on a given condition. ngSwitch and plural are just variations of ngIf itself. So you can go over the documents. It's pretty easy. It's not a big deal. Yeah.
I didn't get the difference between ngSwitch and plural. Like both are for switching with the conditional statements, right? Giving a value and.
Yeah, true. So
where to use plural and where to use any scenario?
okay, cool. Suppose you're talking about ngPlural, right?
Yeah. I wanted to understand specifically.
Okay, so first let me tell you about ngSwitch. ngSwitch is very much similar to ng. Switch statement that you have in programming languages like Java or C#, even C. Correct? Now, in those switch statements, you can only specify one specific value. Suppose for a value of 2, you do something. For a value of 4, you do something else.
Right.
Now, in certain scenarios, when you need to do something on a range of values. So suppose I need to do one specific task when the value is from 10 to 30, and another task when the value is from, say, 30 to 50. In that case, I'll be using ngPlural. Understandable? Okay.
So can I use a regular expression for condition?
Regular expression.
For example, I need a range of 20 to 30, 70 to 80.
Okay.
Can I use a regular expression?
In this ngPlural,
Yes.
why will you use this expression? You just need to specify greater than equal to 70, like that.
I have 2 ranges.
That can be specified. It's a simple thing. So I hope that's understandable, that plural ngPlural is for a range of values, while ngSwitch is for one specific value. And ngFor will create a list view from a collection. So suppose you have an array or something, some object maybe. An object can also be interpreted as a collection. So in that case, you can loop over that object or array and represent that as a list in your UI.
Means it works as ng repeater.
Yeah, very much. Very much. So here I have a demonstration of ng4 as well. Let me go to the code. Becomes very dark.
Yeah. Should I just switch on the lights?
No, it's okay. It's okay. I
Can
can.
you change the background to white?
Yeah, I can, but I won't. Yeah.
Just now we told that ng switch, like switching, we give the condition ng switch, whatever value, so and so.
Yeah, specific value.
0, 1, 2, whatever
right.
it is. So we are showing that particular DOM or a template.
Okay.
In ng plural also we do it like that, right? Like we are giving the ng plural and the values we give in front of that 1, 2, 3, 4.
So if you specify something like greater than 1 and the value comes as -1, then that DOM element won't be rendered. If the value is anything greater than 1, for say 15, then that DOM element will be rendered.
In ng plural also?
ng plural, yeah. But in ng switches case, if you specify case 1 and the value comes to be 15, the DOM element won't be rendered.
Doesn't get switch.
I will personally help you on that later.
Okay.
Okay, where was I? ng4. ng4. So here I have a demonstration of both ngIf and ng4 together. Based on this condition where when you select peace or chaos, it has hung. Okay, based on the selection of peace or chaos, I have this list, peace levels, chaos levels, and based on that condition, if you see here, this is the UL element that renders this. So I have this ngIf condition. If the user has selected peace, then I'll render all the peace levels. The syntax is very simple. Let peace level of peace levels, and you just render that peace level. So it's kind of, you iterate over this peace levels array, get the value one by one in this peace level variable, and you render it here.
That let is compulsory.
Yeah. You have some other syntax also, like hash.
It is just declaring a value. Like
That's-
source and
Yeah, that we don't use anymore. So okay, and the same goes with the other UL. In this case, when you select chaos, you have a list of chaos levels, and that chaos level is rendered here. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. So let me go over to a custom directive. How will you implement your own directive? Now, first, let me come
But
here.
peace level array we declare component.
Sorry. Yeah, correct. Yeah. Okay. This is where I will be explaining custom directives. So I have two divs here. This is not a draggable div, and this is a draggable div. Okay. So as I was saying, directive adds a functionality to an HTML element. So you see, this and this HTML element are both same, but it's just that I have not applied a draggable directive on this one, but I have applied a draggable directive on the other one. So that draggable directive just changed the behavior of this DOM element in the sense that the second one can be dragged. You see these two divs here. The first one has a class of box. The second one also has a class of box, but I have specified a directive called draggable. Let me open the implementation. Okay, so first let me go through the UI a little bit more. You see on the first one, the cursor is an arrow one, or in this case this caret one. But in the second one, when I move over this, the cursor changes to a move cursor, which signifies that this element is draggable. So that is done through something called host binding. Again, I will repeat what a host is. The host is the element on which you have applied your directive. So you have applied the draggable directive on this div, so this div becomes the host of this draggable directive. Okay. So what do I do here? I just do a binding on the host. By host binding, I mean I do a binding on the host, on the div directive, a binding of style.cursor, and I change the cursor to move.
So where are you mentioning the cursor is a class or its ID? So
It's
a style.
Yeah.
Cursor is a property.
can you just show the HTML?
HTML. Okay. So the first one and the second one doesn't have a much difference. It's just that I've applied draggable directive. That's it.
Can we name it as ng draggable?
Those are already prefixed with ng. So for your purposes, you can do it with AL, Accion Labs maybe. Okay. How was that?
Just one question. So is it the cursor move that is that the only thing that directive sets as a host binding?
Yeah, for host binding, that's the only thing for now. It's just for demonstration purposes. And
if we want to set multiple properties, do we declare multiple host bindings or the same host binding metadata can hold the?
No, one binding at a time.
Yeah, even that move cursor can't move, right? So move is something some keyword or?
Yeah, it's a CSS style. So if I suppose I change it to pointer,
Okay.
then yeah, you have used pointer, so you would know that. Yeah, see?
It becomes
So I'll revert it back to move. So this is just an indication. I mean, whenever the draggable directive is applied on the directive, I change the cursor to move so that the user knows, okay, that this is draggable. Other things that we need to do is we need to have a handle on mouse down. Whenever I click on this, mouse down, I need to have an handle on mouse up. And I also need to have an handle when we move the mouse after doing a mouse down. So after I do a mouse down, I need to have a handle on mouse move, and I need to have an handle on mouse up. Understandable? Okay. Let me come to the code. So here you see I have 3 host listeners: mouse down, mouse up, and mouse move. Each of them, not each of them, but some of them provides this event. You just so that you can identify if there is event related data that is you need. So suppose in this case, on the case of a mouse down, I have used this event.button equal to 2. So suppose when I do a right click on this element, this dragging feature doesn't work. Only on the left click it works. So once the button value is 1, which means a value, which means I have clicked with the left button, then I come in this section. This section, what it does is it takes the current location of the element and it starts dragging. Now on start dragging, what I do is I set a variable called this.moving, which says it's true, and I change the z index to a very high value so that while dragging, it doesn't go beneath any other element. Okay. Okay. Mouse. Okay. So this is after once I click on the element and I start dragging. The other part is when I keep on moving the element. So it checks first here if the element is being moved. And if the element is being moved, then I call a function called this.moveTo. Where are you? Yeah. So from here, I move from the original position to my new position. But before that, I first check whether there is actually an original position or not. Just a safety check, nothing much. Here then I do a calculation, simple calculation of how much coordinate system I have changed, how much I have translated, meaning I have moved from here to here. So this value I calculate here on these two lines. Then I translate the current element and I set the value here, style.transform. This is just a standard CSS. I mean, setting standard CSS properties. Okay.
Okay, why it is written in TypeScript file? It is in the TypeScript file, right?
Yeah, because this has to be dynamic, right? Whenever the element moves, you need to calculate how much it has moved, and based on that, you need to set the position. So it is dynamic. So anything that you need to do dynamic, JavaScript has to come in play. Okay, this was the overall structure of it. A few points. Yeah. Move down.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are three events and three motion distance setup formats, right?
Yeah.
One is for mouse down, one is for mouse up and mouse up.
Okay.
Mouse down and mouse move both accepts the second parameter, which is the event itself.
Okay.
But for the second one, mouse up, does not seem to accept the event parameter.
I can pass in this case, my logic doesn't need it. So
if I need to intercept the event and the target those specific properties of the event, then I need to pass it, right? Yeah,
correct. This is a part of the dependency injection. So whenever you need something, you declare it. Otherwise, if you don't need, just don't declare it. That's it, done. Any other question? Okay. Few points to note here. Last day when we had seen about components, we had a decorator here called @component. In this case, you have a decorator called @directive, since you are creating a directive. And you have the selector, draggable. So this is an attribute selector, similar as CSS selectors. So that is all about directives. Do you? Sorry.
What is this class position?
Class position. Okay. This I am using in the code here, so that's why. I can show. You see, temp trans, old trans, original. So just a structure which maintains the x and y coordinates. That's all.
It's a TypeScript class.
Yeah, nothing much. Any questions on directives? Otherwise, I'll move on. Any questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we need to import this directly in our component?
No. You just need to declare it here. App.module. Directive. Yeah, you see. So in the declarations part, last day you would have seen that we needed to include this component, right? Whenever we did server component, we had to declare it here. In similar terms, you need to include it here too. I mean, for the draggable directive too. Just add it in the providers array. Sorry, declarations array.
Is that will be available for the entire application?
For this entire module.
That is what app module means that application.
Yeah.
I want a specific component.
Why would you need specific component ways?
I don't want to use other components. Why should I keep it in this module?
That is not necessary at all. In case of services only, you need to do that because services will be singleton. And suppose you need to have a separate copy of your service in your component, then only it's needed. But since directives can be directives can have multiple instances, so we really don't need it. Okay. Any other question? Okay. So I'll move on to, okay, and let me go over the slides a bit.
What is that we cannot do with the component? But
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it
yeah.
with-
I'm going over it. Huh. So in case of structural directives, these are the few key points that you need to know. Structural directives are used for manipulating HTML layout. The element is removed from DOM. Only one can be applied per host element. What I mean is, okay, so here when I was doing ng4 over the collection, I was actually writing only one li. Okay, let me come back. You see, I'm actually writing only one li, but this ng4 directive changes the structure of the DOM layout in the sense that it produces 3 LIs, since there are 3 elements in this piece lovers array. So it changes the structure from 1, it changes to 3. So that's why it is called a structural directive. Similarly, in the case of an ngIf, based on a condition, either that element will be there or it will not be there. So from 1 to 0 or 0 to 1, I mean 1 element or no element or 1 element, like that. So again, this one also changes the structure. And only one element can be applied per host element. What I mean by that is this ngIf condition cannot be applied here on the same element. Okay, there are internal templates being used here, so I can explain, but this is not the time. Just know that ngIf, ng4, these are two structural directives together with ng-switch and ng-plural. They cannot be applied on the same element at the same time.
But can we apply like ng class and ng4?
Yeah, those are attribute directives, so you can. Okay, now when to use directives, I have written a few examples here. So the one I showed already, the one I showed already was a simple one wherein you change the behavior of the element to be able to being dragged. I don't know what I'm saying. So that was a draggable element, and then if you want to add some more behavior, these are few examples. Like suppose you want to add a validator to a template driven form, simply say form for now. So I will create a directive and I will add it to the template itself. That can be done. The other thing I implemented already, if you want to resize an element, that can also be done through a directive. These links that you see here, these are links to GitHub projects. You can go to them and check out the code if you want to. The other things that can be done through a directive is handling virtual scroll, scroll spy, and parallax web pages. Let me show you a demo on that. Virtual scroll. You see there are in the right hand side pane there are 6 to 7 elements. Even when the user actually scrolls through the list, there's this div. I mean this div, and inside that there are only 6 to 7 elements. Even though there are many hundreds of elements there, but at times within the viewing window, you have only 6 to 7 elements, and only those ones are shown here, and it doesn't even get rendered. Only when the user actually scrolls through the list, it renders, but again the previous ones are hidden. I mean, it is removed from the DOM. So this can be done through directives. Few other examples like scroll spy. You see, when I scroll through the list, pay attention to the right hand side. You see the highlight changes based on which section of the document I am. Okay, So this can be done through directives. One more example I have, this is called a parallax web page. Notice the awesomeness of it. Okay, so these are just examples, nothing much. You can go through them, and these all can be achieved through directives. Let me come over to pipes. Any questions on directives? Any? Okay, cool. Pipes. A pipe takes in data as input and transforms it to a desired output. So you can consider pipes to be just a function, a normal function, simple function, which will take an input and it will give an output. Just the same, if there is the same input, and it will give you the same output again and again. So it's kind of a pure function if you are coming from a functional programming background. Here are a few examples. This is just for the slide. I'll come here. Pipes. You see, these are a few pipes applied here. Let me come over to the code, then we will go back. Okay, so here I have few variables defined: short guy, tall guy, honorable guy. And then I have, notice this part for now. This is how I am using a pipe. So short guy has a value of Tyrion Lannister. And when I apply the pipe on this variable, the value changes to all small cases. Okay. Same condition with uppercase and title case. In uppercase, all the characters changes to uppercase, and in title case, only the first character of every word changes to an uppercase. So the basic way to use a pipe is just to add this pipe, or carrot, some people say. You add this pipe and specify the pipe name, and the variable value will be applied, will go through this pipe. You can consider it this way: will go through this pipe, or this pipe will be applied on this variable and the value gets transformed. So this value acts as an input to this pipe and it gives an output, and the output is shown here. So one input, one output, done. There
standard things, right? Lowercase.
Yeah, these are inbuilt. I'll show a custom one too. Running out of time. Anyways, this is a date one. You see, this is the default date, and even you can specify parameters with pipe. I mean, one parameter is by default, that is the value on which you are applying the pipe. So as I was saying, this is the value on which you are applying the title case pipe. Apart from that, if you want to specify few more parameters, then you can do it by specifying it like this. You give a colon after the pipe name and whatever parameter you want to pass. So in case of a date, you have this date object here. You pass it through the date pipe, and then you specify a particular format in which you want the date to be represented in the UI. So this is the pipe, and this is the output of that pipe once I have specified the value of today. Okay, so this one just, this is the default format, and if you want to change it, then you specify a format, nothing much. Again, you can chain pipes. So you have this pipe here, you have a parameterized pipe, and on output of this one can be passed on to the next one. So if you see, the difference between this one and this one is just that the November here is in uppercase. Cool. Okay, now I'll show you a custom pipe implementation. Okay, so as I was saying, that pipe is, you can consider a pipe to be just a function which takes in an input and gives you an output. So that function is here. Now, before that, you need to create a class. In this case, I have created a debit card number pipe. What it does is, if you give it a string of 16 digits, then it changes the output with a space in between after every 4 digits. Simple. Okay. So I have this pipe class here, and what I do is I say that this is a pipe. For me to say that this is a pipe, I need to have this pipe decorator, and this implements a specification here. Although this is optional, you can remove it, but for better practices, you should keep it. What this means is, when you implement from this interface, you need to implement this transform function. This transform function is the one that will take your input and will give out your output. Okay, so the input here in this case is this string, and the output, how I derive is, let's not concentrate on this one, I'll come back. Let's concentrate on this part first. So I have a temporary array which doesn't have anything yet, and I loop over the string that is passed to me, and every time what I do is, after every 4 character, I take in that 4 character and push it to this array. So in the first time, the array will have this value, the second time the array will have this value, and the third time this, fourth time this. So 4 values I push into this temp array. Okay, and then finally I join it through a space. So once joined, this will give me a string of this representation, and I can show it in the UI. About this part, this is just a part of best practice. Let's suppose the value that is passed to your pipe, to your custom pipe, is not of the desired type that you want to operate on. In this case, I want to operate only on strings. So if the value is something else, like an object or an array, I'll just return the same value. I won't process anything. Why do I return the same value? That is because I should not break what Angular already provides. Angular provides this functionality of chaining pipes. So if I don't return anything, then this chaining of pipes won't work. The value from one pipe won't go to the other pipe. Am I understandable?
Yes. But instead of string, you can also do single quotes. Empty quotes. Empty single quotes. In the
What he's saying is that when you're going for the chaining, the other chaining also has to take value. Return value should be there.
Okay. Pipes done. Any questions on pipes? Yeah, please.
His voice is gone.
Bixby lai.
It's better that he emails you the question.
Okay, I'll move over to observables. Okay, observables are a bit complex. So let me try to explain you guys. First, we need to understand why do we need observables at all. Okay. So see, normally we have worked with arrays, with vector, map, or some other collections maybe. So in case of an array, suppose I have an array. Now if I have to access any value from the array, I will give a square bracket and give an index maybe. This is consistent with most of the programming languages. Now suppose I have a map. In that case, I will have to do something like map.get and specify a key. Correct? Some other examples can also be there, like suppose you have a graph. Okay, now to take one element from a graph, maybe you need to specify some node, and after that what node you want to get based on what traversal you want to do. So there are like pre-order traversal, in-order traversal, post-order traversal, there are many of them. The thing that I want to get to is, so these are all collections, and most of the times we need to iterate over these collections to read these values, to read the entire value from the collection. And every time we have to do that, we have to write something like this. Suppose I'm writing a code for this array. So I'll do this. Simple. Now, if I do for the map, then I will first have to get all the keys of the map. Map dot get keys. Suppose I have all the keys, then for all the keys I can iterate over here and get all the values. Okay. Now to get all the value, I mean val is equal to, it should be something like map dot get with the key. That key will be here. Okay. So there is a difference between how you iterate different types of collections. Correct. In this case, you give an index. In this case, you give a key. Now, what if I want to generalize all this? Okay, what if I want to generalize all this? Then in that case, I will have to write something called an iterator. That iterator, so let me write it this way. Implements iterator. So this is a class array. Whenever I create an array, then inherently I'm creating an object of this class. Now, when I say I implement iterator, the array implements iterator, then there has to be a method called iterator. Just like the case when I showed you the example on pipes, I had that implements pipe transform and I had to implement transform function, right? So when you do this implements iterator, you have to implement an iterator function. Okay, this iterator function will return some object. I'm not going into details. It will return some object by which, I mean, on this object there will be functions like has next. Oh, my writing. And there will be something called next. So these are two functions. So most of the times this is an example for just iterating over collections. When we just need to read the collections, that's it. It's not for updating or changing, deleting anything. This is just for iterating. Now, whenever I implement this iterator, and I have this functions on this object that I am returning from the iterator, what I can simply do is from this instance of the array, I can do array dot iterator. Okay, so this will give me some object, the iterator object I mean, and this will have these two functions. Okay, now once I have these two functions, in my loop, all I need to do is just check with using this iterator that whether there is any further element or not. If there is, then I will do a next. So I will check using has next that whether there is an element or not. If there is, then I will do a next to get the next element. Code-wise, how it will look. For say object OL collection, and you have this brackets. So internally, this is an enumerated for loop. Internally, what this for loop will do is it will see that this collection provides an iterator or not. If it doesn't, then simply it will abort. It will show you an error. But if there is, then every time it calls this has next method to check whether there is an element, and if there is, then it will print it here. Clear? So iterative pattern is just to give a generalization over iterating over a collection. How much time do I have, Emily?
You can take as much of time as the audience allows.
Okay, I hope the audience won't skip. Okay. So this is about everything that I explained was about synchronous data. Okay, synchronous, by synchronous I mean this data. This is something that you already have while the program runs. What if you have dynamic data? Data that will arrive over time. Okay, something like, suppose, an event. Events can be of many types, like it can be a key press, mouse move, click, anything. So whenever the user performs some action, only then you have the data. You don't have prior knowledge of that data. Correct? And there can be data from, say, WebSocket. If you know what I mean, WebSockets, just an example will be when you develop a chat application, that time you need WebSockets for fast communication between two clients. So from WebSockets too, you can have asynchronous data. Then you, from REST API, you can have asynchronous data. Clear? So these are just, what I'm trying to say is these are different sources of asynchronous data. Just like array, map, graph were different sources of synchronous data. Cool? Okay. Now, all of these can have different interfaces, like just like the way I was saying in case of arrays that you need to specify an indexer, and in case of a map, you have to use a .get function. In these cases too, you have different interfaces. What if you want to combine all these? That is when the idea of observables come in. Okay? Just like the way Iterator unifies all your synchronous data access, observables will unify your asynchronous data access. I hope that's clear. आप समझे क्या?
No, I'm on this money. Yeah, 15 minutes back.
Okay.
15 to 20 minutes.
Hey, is somebody asking any question?
No, no one is asking. They couldn't see that, so I just switched on your video. If you want, you can close your video. Or I'll do it. No.
Cool. Probably I spoke a bit too much about observables, so let me come back to slides. This observables is what we are talking about is in with respect to RxJS. Observable implementation can be there in some other languages based on some other programming paradigm. This has nothing to do just with RxJS. So in Angular, we do it for, in Angular, we do it with RxJS. So just like I was saying, there can be multiple sources of data coming from an observable, asynchronous data coming, and you can convert all of them to an observable. So suppose the first one is just an example of a synchronous data. This is from array. So suppose you have an array of 1, 2, 3. I know that syntax doesn't look like an array, but if you specify a spread operator on the arrays, then this is how it will look like. So if you want to convert an array to an observable, you can just do observable.off. If you want to have an observable from an event, you can do something like this.box.native element and the event name. So the box is the element, and this string specifies the event name, meaning whenever I do a mouse move on the box, it will fire me, it will give me a new data. Okay. Similarly, in the case of WebSockets, you see WebSocket.onMessage event observe. I will rather go from code. Yeah, you see here. So this is an observable which we derive from an event. If I come over to the demo, yeah, I'm already here. You see, whenever I will move my mouse over the over this one, you see it changes the coordinates. Okay. All I want to say is, it's not compulsory that you have to use observables, but if you have data coming in from multiple sources and you want to operate on them on a similar way, then you should be using observables. For most of the applications, you don't even need to use observables. You can straight away go with promise, async await. That is all fine. Okay, I'll go over this demo. Please check this first line here. 10, 20, 30, done. So all I'm doing here is, you see, this is a basic observable implementation. I am creating an observable, and the observable accepts a function. The observable accepts a function. This function has a parameter of emitter, and this emitter can be used to emit new values. You see in the first line I have emitted 10. That's why you see 10 in the first place. Then after a time of 2000 milliseconds, which means 2 seconds, you see another value of 20, and then another value of 30 after 4 seconds. After 5 seconds, you see done. This is just a basic implementation which just wants to show you that you can emit values from an observable, and whatever the observer is, that observer will be able to subscribe to the observable. Okay. Okay, this is the observable. I returned it from this function already. I showed you. This is the observable, and this is the observer. Okay, the observer will have 3 functions: next, error, and complete. So whenever this observable implementation will emit a value, that value will be passed on to this next function. Okay, and whenever this one emits a commit event, then that value, and there's no value, of course. It just signifies that it's complete. So it calls this function. How it does is, it does through this line. So this line, if you see, I already have the observable that is returned from create basic observable, and I subscribe onto that observable. And in that observable, I pass in this observer.next, observer.error, and observer.complete, 3 functions. Okay, if you don't want these functions, you can simply remove, but at least next is needed. I mean, that is not also compulsory, but you would need it in most programs.
What do you mean by subscribe?
Subscribe. So substrate means, okay, I should have told this. Okay, in case when I was telling you about iterators, that is more of a pull model. So in that case, you pull the data yourself. You give an array and then its index. You yourself pull the value whatever you need. In the case of an observable, it follows a push model. In the sense, the observable itself will notify you whenever there is new data. So for that purpose, you need to subscribe to that observable so that whenever there is a new value, you want to execute this function. Understandable?
I have a question.
Yeah.
See, in the emitter, while you were emitting the values, you have given the timings, right? After 50 seconds, 50 seconds, so on.
Yeah.
So suppose if what happens, like we are using observable to synchronize our events, to synchronize the data, right? That's what is the use, what you are telling. Like we have multiple data. So like we are using observable to get the data in a sequence, in a synchronous way.
No.
No,
that is not the thing. I'll explain you later.
Fine.
I mean, that's a big explanation. Okay. So these are just basic. Okay. One more important point about observables is, since observables together comes with RxJS in this case when we are working on Angular, so it provides you some operators like map, then filter, and what you can do with them is, these are very basic, so I won't go much deep into it. Yeah, you see I have this collection 257. I am creating an observable out of this collection. Okay, here observable.from it means create an observable from this collection. That's it. Now once an observable is created, you can do a .map on it and you can change the value of it. So for each number that is there in the collection 257, it changes it to its square. So it's like 257 changes to 4, 25 and 49. So these are just some extra methods that you can use on observables to process your data. That's it. You can even do this. You see here, I am doing a different sort of mapping. In this case, what I'm doing is I am printing out the index and the value, index and the value, index and the value. Okay, so in this case, you see I have written change data structure itself. Here it was an array of numbers, and I have kept it as it is, an array of numbers, but I have changed the domain from simple numbers to its square. But in this case, I'm changing the structure itself. I am using the same line of array of numbers, but I am changing it to an array of objects. These are objects. Wow, even Himali understood. Okay, this is about map. One more thing there is, that is filter. You can filter through the list. How do you do that? It's just a simple implementation. if num mod 2 is equal 1. So I'm just returning all the odd numbers. Okay, yeah. So I'm returning all the odd numbers out of this collection 2, 5, 7. I get 5 and 7. 2 is discarded. You can even compose using one operator, using two different operators. Just like in the case of a pipe, you could compose. You could pass one parameter to from one pipe to the other pipe. Just like that, you can do composition on this one too. So here what I'm doing is I'm first filtering out all the odd numbers, and then I'm mapping over and changing it to it's a square. So the odd numbers were this 5 and 7, and I've converted it to 25 and 49. That is square of 5 and 7 respectively. Let me come over to these slides. This is about observables from different sources. Observable advantages. The first one is the one that I explained, and I took so much time in that. Unifies all our event type APIs, provides a common interface. I will just repeat over it a bit. Provides a common interface in the sense you don't have to do add, remove listener, sorry, what did I say? Add event listener, remove event listener. You don't have to do all those for any event coming from DOM API, or even for WebSockets, you don't have to listen to specific events. In some cases, again, see, Angular is not for web development. It can be used for native app development as well. So in that case, you can have events like touch and swipe. Even those events can be handled through an observable, can be converted to an observable. So all these data sources can be unified into an observable. Once you unify it, you operate on that data using observable operators. Here, deal with multiple values easily, that I already showed. You can have a collection 257 and you can process them. Composition, also I showed. Map, filter, you can go ahead and check the other ones. You can have some functions like retry. So suppose when you are doing an HTTP request and the request fails, then you can specify, do something like dot retry and then a certain number. Suppose you specify 5, then it will keep on retrying at least 5 times, and if the request fails for 5 times. So every time you do a request, it fails, it retries. You do a request, it fails, it retries. If it fails again, it retries. And if it's success, it's all okay. So this can be used to retry your HTTP requests in case it fails. HTTP response can be cached using publish replay. Then there are things like you can cancel things that you don't need. Yeah, thank you so much. Suppose, not suppose, you can see, this is a game, right? So in this case, I need to listen on this swipe gesture, right? And based on whatever data is, I need to process on that, correct? But suppose I tap on this resume button, pause button. I no longer need to listen on the swipe gestures anymore, right? So I would unsubscribe, meaning cancel from this observable data, okay? And as soon as I resume, I can resubscribe to it and proceed further. Thank you so much. And the last one is Angular has direct support to bind observables in the UI layer. So you can directly bind observables in the HTML using something called async pipe. I'll go into that later. As I said, when you need to use observables, it can be used in cases where there are data from multiple sources. So in case of multiplayer games, you will have data from different players, and you will have to listen on the WebSockets and on the gestures of the current user. So you can combine all those data together and process them in one go. Then it can be used with geo-navigation. So suppose you are developing an app wherein you need to keep on updating the location of the user based on his movements. Again, then you will be getting data repeatedly and you need to process them. So that is where observables can be used. Shall we or?
Can we make next?
Huh?
Next.
Okay.
Wait. Yeah, did everyone sign the?
No, I haven't.
So conclude, Bharat. Please tell them, the rest of the guys who are listening, that will continue in the next section.
Tomorrow?
No, day after tomorrow.
Himali is not there.
No, I'm there. I'm not going there.
Okay, guys, we will continue this on Wednesday. These were there were too many topics.
Not Tuesday.
You said day after tomorrow.
Oh,
Okay, we will continue this on Wednesday since there were too many topics. I couldn't cover all of them, so we'll continue it on Wednesday.
thank you, Bharat.